Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to an exciting session for the Research Administrator Symposium 2003. My name is Ryan Sykes. I will be your presenter today. If at any point you have a question, I do ask that you just go ahead and post it in the chat or, unmute and, ask away. But because this session is being recorded, you may not want to be, broadcast to everyone who sees this in the future. So again, just post in the chat and I will check the chat infrequently, to make sure I cover everything. But if I do miss your question, I apologize. We have a lot to cover today. And if I do miss your question, you can send us an email at qualtrics@unm.edu. And that will get you to my team and we'll be able to support you with any question you may have today. So let me just get set up here. And perfect. So I will just be starting out with a brief slideshow to show everyone sort of what we're going to be going over today. Welcome to Qualtrics 201, Workflows and Automations, which is primarily aimed at administrators and project managers. But there will be a lot of useful skills that we will cover in today's session that could be useful for anyone across campus, be you a student, staff, or faculty. So just to introduce myself, my name is Ryan Sykes. I'm a Technical Analyst 3 from Academic Technologies. I am presenting, and I have support today from another member of my team, Kunj Bhavsar, a Technical Analyst 2 from my team. The goals and outcomes for today's session is that we'll be exploring Qualtrics, particularly survey logic and workflows. We'll learn to set up an authenticator, which is something that allows your users to log in and automatically capture some data. And then we will also synthesize several principles. We'll work with survey flow, workflows, and survey setup, and how you can interact across those different features. And then finally, we'll gain some familiarity with piping and embedded data applications. So real quick, what is Qualtrics? Qualtrics is a web-based software that allows a user to create surveys and generate reports without having any previous programming knowledge. If you're familiar with other tools used across campus, such as FormStack, Google Forms, RedCap, Smartsheets, Opinio, those are all similar tools to Qualtrics. Qualtrics is the new kid on the block, and the thing that makes it so exciting is that it can be used by anyone. So if you're faculty, staff, or students, and you have a NetID, you're good to go and use Qualtrics right away. It's used for all purposes, all-purpose research, testing and quizzing, departmental voting, data visualization, event registration, marketing sign-up, intake forms, and data sharing. And the thing we'll be focusing on today are these three here: event registration, marketing sign-up, and intake forms. So just to start, how do you get a Qualtrics account? Well, you already have one. All you need to do is go to qualtrics.unm.edu. That's this website here, and click this blue login button here at the top. You'll be fed right into the system. This is actually no longer accurate. You'll be logged in right away and be able to start using the tool immediately. And like I said earlier, if you have any questions about this presentation or about the service in general, please email my team at qualtrics@unm.edu. And before we get any deeper, I always want to talk about Qualtrics security and regulatory compliance. This tool is approved for the housing of sensitive data. However, two rules of thumb. If you don't need it, don't collect it. And I always encourage everyone to come to this website here, which should open up. This is, I'm sorry, one moment. Took me to the wrong website. The website you do want to go to is data.unm.edu. This is the Information Security and Privacy Office's data governance site, and it gives you all the information you need on what you need to do if you want to gather sensitive or protected data, be that HIPAA data, FERPA data, data involving human subjects, confidential data that involves export control. If you're doing research on this sort of data, it's likely that you've already filled out a security questionnaire, but if not, you're of course free to reach out to this team and they can provide further guidance. And so without further ado, if you had any questions about this sort of brief introduction, please post them in the chat. I'm going to be going right into Qualtrics here as we do have a lot to cover. So just to start off, I have already pre-built a survey that we will be using here. If you have questions on how to build a survey, add questions and so on and so forth, you can reach out to my team, but there's also a really good resource which is the vendor support and the vendor resources, which you can access from this question mark up here on the right. So you can go to XM Basecamp, which is a suite of pre-recorded videos. You can ask the community, which is a forum, or you can scroll a little bit. You can click here to come to our support site, or you can contact the vendor support. And they have 24/7 live support via chat. They're really good. They have phone support or email support, whatever suits your needs. But just real quick, I'm going to break down what's going on in this survey. This is may be familiar to some of you, and those of you who are not familiar with it, this is a mock-up of a procurement form, but it could easily be substituted with a event intake form, an account request form, an email sign-up form, some research, elections, and et cetera, et cetera. These principles are pretty universal and robust, but more or less, I have some basic questions here that we'll be adding some features to. And the way you get here is you just create a new project within Qualtrics, and it drops you on a blank page, and you can go ahead and insert these questions on this survey builder over here on the left. But as you can see, I have several sets of questions here that are broken up into what are called blocks. You can click block, and that'll add a new block. The way to think of blocks is they're essentially pages in Qualtrics. So if I click preview here, you'll see that a preview should populate. One moment. The preview doesn't seem to be working with Zoom at the moment, so I'll just sort of step away from that at the moment and go over to distributions and just grab my live link here. That will allow me to visualize it straightforward. I'll click distribute here. I'll get a single reusable link, and I'll copy this link and I'll just post it in here so we can see what this looks like in practice. Perfect. So you can see there's just one question on this page. It's required. I'll click yes. There's just one question on this page. I can click yes or no, and so on and so forth. So it's broken up into these different pages. And the reason I've done that is if we come back to survey and we come over here on the left and go to survey flow, this is where we'll be starting out today. This is the survey logic where we can organize our survey into a bunch of pieces. These blocks appear as different blocks within the survey flow, which allows us to insert logic in between them. And then logic is what acts off of conditions, which allows us to pre-populate secondary values and so on. So the first thing we're going to be doing today actually is starting off with what's called an authenticator. Many of you are probably familiar with this in practice, but just not in name. What this is this is a login page that when your customers approach your survey externally, they are asked to log in as a UNM person. This only works for UNM persons. There's ways to set it up for external folks, but you do need to have their emails. But in this case, there's two values here. One, you can forcibly verify that they are a UNM person by setting this up. And two, this allows you to automatically grab some embedded data from them, such as name, username, and what's most valuable, email. This way, you can keep certain questions, certain demographic questions out of your survey and grab that information automatically. And the value here is it really does minimize the chance that you get some useless data from your customers. Sometimes your customers will provide stuff that is not necessarily what you need. They may provide the wrong net ID, they may provide the wrong email. But the nice thing about this is if we come over here and we click SSO, that's what we're going to be using here. You could also upload a contact list, but we want to use UNM's pre-built Azure authentication. And what that is anytime you go to my UNM, you're presented with that UNM basic login page. That's what we're going to be setting up here. And then, feeding your folks straight in to Qualtrics. Now, the steps to set this up are on our website here. If you come to support, you will see a step-by-step guide on how to set up the authenticator, which I will be following here just to make sure I do it correct. But if you're doing it on your own, I recommend coming here, following these steps. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to our team as well. So I'm going to be unchecking associate respondent with panel. That allows us to use a contact list in addition to UNM's sort of baseline of net IDs. But I'll be unchecking that. And clicking this box here, which is capture respondent identifying info, this will automatically capture certain details if we populate it correctly. So one of the first things we need to do is define these embedded data fields. What's embedded data? So embedded data you can think of them as rows or columns in a spreadsheet that are blank until we define them. We can assign whatever we want to them, and we can use these values to inform Qualtrics what to do based on certain conditions. So here, I'll just go ahead and click this. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just name this embedded data field, whatever I'd like to name it. You'll want to call it something easily identifiable. So here, I'll just call it first name. And you need to match it to one of the fields on our support site here. So if you scroll down here, you'll see all these values. They have to match, they're case sensitive. So you need to make sure that if you're trying to get the first name, you type given name. If you're trying to get the email field, you type email address. We're just going to be getting the email address and the first name today. So I'll just go ahead and type first name. And then over here on the right, we have this little green plus button. This will allow me to add a new field. I'm going to name it email, so it's easily identifiable for my purposes. And then the value within the SMO or the SSO is email address. Then under SSO type, we're not going to be using token. We're going to come down here to shibboleth. Don't worry about what that means. That's just the type we use. And there's two options here. This one is a backup in case the first one is non-functional. I would recommend just using the first one for your purposes. So now we have this really cool authenticator block, but we have a problem. It's located at the bottom of this flow. So think of this flow as, the order of operations for your survey. So it will start up here, it'll work its way down, This means that our customers will get all these questions and then be asked to log in. We don't really want that. We want to make them log in before they do anything. So we'll move it up here to the top by just dragging it with this move button. And then we want to nest all these questions down here. That way it forces them to authenticate. If it's not nested, it will ask them to authenticate. And if they fail, it'll still send them through. You may or may not want that, depending on if you're working with a hybrid of internal and external customers. In this case, I would just go ahead and move these all under here. Perfect. So now people are forced to log in, and then they will be fed through all of these different steps. However, what we need to do two more things first. We're going to be setting up an approval workflow and capturing some of these respondent details. So we need to add a new element, what's known as an embedded data field. Again, these are fields that you will populate based on values, and we're going to actually add 3 of them. The first one is we're going to call approver. Again, we're just naming these whatever we like. They're not defined by anything quite yet. As you can see here, by default, they're assigned by panel, which is an uploaded form, or the URL. You can pass data by URL. And what we'll be doing for this approver one is passing it by the URL. But we'll get there in a moment when we get over to the workflows. There's 2 sets of data that we'll be working, or 2 sets of features we'll be working with here. Now we need to add these embedded data fields we created up here just so that they match. We'll be creating one for first name. That way it matches up here. And when we click that, you'll see reserved embedded data fields cannot have custom values. So what that means is this field here will match this name here, and we can't customize what it's going to be because it's going to be defined by the SSO. And we'll do the same thing with email. Now, we do need to also move this embedded data block up. Otherwise, those fields will not be defined until after the survey is completed. And the reason we do that is so that these questions down here, these 4 sets of questions, their display logic can be informed by some of these, particularly this approver status. We're going to be hiding the approval questions until someone comes in, they take the form, and then we'll send out some emails based on that. But this is a very simple example of a survey flow. You can get really involved with this, and there's a lot of different types of blocks. But for this demonstration, because we're a little bit short on time, we're just going to be showing off a particular use case here, and then you can utilize all the permutations of it. I don't see any questions in the chat, but again, go ahead and post any questions you may have in the chat, and I'll do my best to get to them as they pop up. So always make sure that you click apply down here in the bottom right. This will save your changes. Then you need to come back to the builder, and you'll see that it says draft up here. This is a lesson I always like to repeat. Anytime you make any changes to a live survey, you need to come over here and click publish. Otherwise, it won't appear on the survey that's going out to your customers, and that can be really confusing. You make all these changes, and you're trying to test it, and they're not. Your testers aren't seeing the changes. That's the main reason why. So the main focus of this presentation is going to be these workflows here. This is another tab within Qualtrics. You can think of workflows as automated steps that do things more or less external. say X happens, it sends an email. So we will be coming over here to workflows to set up several automations. Okay, so you'll notice I have no workflows here. So what I will do is I will just go ahead and create a workflow, and I have several options. I can browse templates if I have any, or I can use the templates that are already pre-populated into the Qualtrics system. In this case, I'm going to start it when an event is received. So something happens, therefore something else will happen. I will be setting this up as a survey response. So we get a response and it triggers this workflow. We have two options here. We have newly created responses or responses updated via the Qualtrics API. We do not have the Qualtrics API at this time. That's a feature that's unavailable to us, but this will work for our purposes. If you wanted to, you could resolve the translations into another language. So if you had your survey set up to intake multiple languages, such as Spanish, English, Vietnamese, Hindi, you could then resolve them into a language of your choosing, should you wish, depending on your purposes. So go ahead and click Finish. Now we're in this workflow creation screen. This screen allows us to define the rules of the workflow. So we're just going to name it something memorable that we won't forget what it is. We're going to call this one approval workflow for approver one. This survey will have 2 approvers on it. And then we will, one moment, go ahead and add a condition. And here you can customize the many permutations of your rules, your and or logic rules. If X happens, then this. If X and Y happens, then this. You can add as many of these as you'd like. And just as the survey flow from before, it'll go top to bottom, but it won't sort of stagger itself. It'll run and then it'll stop. So you need to set up these conditions to fire when the correct circumstances are set up. So in this case, we're going to be making sure that this fires when a certain embedded data condition is met, and we'll be selecting. So here's all of our embedded data fields. Some of these are automatic. Some of these are the 3 that we set up. In this case, we'll be using the approver, and we'll be using a value to sort of move our survey along. In this case, we want it to be, if it is empty, it's a new response. This value hasn't been altered. We've defined it in the survey flow. It's currently empty because we didn't assign any value to it. This will trigger only when it's empty. So we'll go ahead and save this. And then we're going to add a task. What this task is this is the email task to go to the first approver. We will come down to, it's in here somewhere, email. So we want to send an email. And then we're put into this really lovely screen that does take a moment to load because it has a lot of values where we can populate a lot of different data. So the first thing we'll do is we're going to work with this to field here. Of course, we could have a predefined value, which is probably what we'll want to do here. So I'll just send it to myself. But, depending on who your approval is, who your condition is, you can feed different things into here. And we're going to have it come from my team. So we'll just say, Qualtrics. And then you can choose a drop down here. All of these are valid, but I would recommend qualtrics.unm.edu. That way it's recognizable to your customers and it doesn't trip anyone up. And we'll just say it's from me, but you could say something like, this is from academic tech, or OSP, or purchasing, whatever is best for your purposes. And the reply to email, by default, it's this no reply at qemailserver.com. This is the Qualtrics base one, but if someone replies to it, we want it to go to the creator. So in this case, we'll have it go to me. So now for the subject, we want to name this something identifiable. So we'll say approval needed, approver one. Whatever your step is here, this could be your purchasing approver, this could be your Chrome River approver, this could be your event approver, the admin who's going to set it up, whatever you'd like. But then I'd like this to be easily identifiable. So I'm going to insert a value here. that I'm going to call response ID. This is, the ticket number that will be fed throughout the various emails, and we can use something called piped text. Piped text inserts a value from the survey. It can be an answer to a question. It could be one of those embedded data fields. In this case, we're going to do one moment. Response ID here under response, and that's a individualized response that's an individualized ID that will be unique to the response that is submitted. So if your response number 1, it'll put a number 1 in here. It'll be a long number, but it'll always be unique to this particular response that you're tracking. And you'll see there's this hashtag $bracket RM, and then the field. This is just a string code. This means it will be populated automatically by a value within Qualtrics. So, the subject wouldn't end up having this field here. And then we'll say, please click this link as approver 1. And then we're going to insert a link here, which I actually do need to go grab. So I'm going to save this real quick. I'm going to copy this, which is my link from before. Come back to my email. And paste a link in here. So we're going to do several things to this link. We're going to add 2 values to the end of this link, which is something that's known as sourcing. What sourcing does is it allows us to pass information through Qualtrics via links. So if I were to click this link, it would pass the values that I'm about to instill back into the survey. And that allows us to keep returning to the same survey, displaying new questions as we go along. So the first thing we're going to do is add a question mark Q_R. That's just the code for adding these values in. And we'll say equals. This question mark Q_R is not necessarily intuitive, but you can find it on the vendor's website. And again, you can reach out to my team if you need help building these sourced links. But you can add a lot to these. So the first thing we'll add is that response ID field up here. So we'll just go ahead and copy this, which is the $ and the bracket, and we'll paste it here. So this says, the long string of coded text. It seems a little complex, but these values are the same throughout all of your surveys. So it'll always be, field/response ID no matter your survey. And then we're going to add a second sourced value, so we'll add an and sign, which means and this information will be passed along. We'll say Q_R. EL. This is just a value for defining a second condition, and we'll say and approver 1. So if you'll remember, I set up that first workflow to run when approver equals 0. Now this email will be sent out. Someone will get this link, whoever your approver is in the workflow, they'll click this link, they'll be able to go in and review the response because we have this response ID here. And then it will update the approval status to approver 1 has viewed this. It'll change that embedded value, and then we can start to do some logic on that. So here we're saying, all right, approver 1's going in. We'll go ahead and include a response report so they can see it in their email. And then we'll go ahead and click save. Okay. And then also I would like to, in addition to that email I set up before, I'm going to just set up another task earlier, another email task. I want my recipient who was taking the survey to get their responses. So we're going to do something similar to what we did before, but just a little bit more streamlined. So up here in the to field, we will actually go ahead and pipe in that embedded data email. So your UNM user will come in to your survey. They'll start to take it. They'll log in on that authenticator we set up, a usual UNM landing page. They can use their salute information or their UNM information, depending on which one they use. That'll be populated here. So if they logged in with their salute email, it'll take their salute email, it'll plug it into here because we set up those embedded data fields, and always send this email to them with helpful information. So we could say, we want this to be response received, customer ID, and then we'll go ahead and pipe in that response ID again. That way, they have that number, you have that number, and we'll say hello, and we'll add their name here. So in this editor, you can pipe text in using this A here. And we'll go to embedded data and let's put their name, first name. So it'll say, hello, Ryan, if it were me. And then you can say, please see your response below. Please expect approval within 1 to 2 workdays, or whatever you need. And we'll go ahead and include the response report that will show all of their responses, but we'll also show the full question text. This way they get, a breakdown of the questions they were asked and the answers they gave. And you can include embedded data in here. So if you want to include all embedded data, that would be all these fields that we're doing. Generally, you don't want to show this information to your customer, so I would just click none, but it's really up to what your needs are. So go ahead and click save. Now, the first time we take this survey, it will trigger this response. It will go ahead and trigger upon intake. It will check if that field is empty. So if this is a brand new response, it'll go ahead and fire. It will first send an email noting all of the users' responses, for their purpose, so they can reference it, as well as any information you may need to convey to them at this point. And then finally, this email goes to your approver here. In this case, we have a static approver, but you could include some logic to have different approvers based on different conditions. We're going to make sure this workflow is turned on. And we're just going to go ahead and click close here. So now we have this first workflow. In order to make this workflow work, we need to go back into our survey and make use of that approver 1 value. And what we're going to do is we're going to add some skip logic to some of these approver questions so that our original survey takers don't see those approval questions. We don't want them to get confused by, why do I see this, and so on and so forth. So we'll come down here to approver 1. We'll click this. And we'll make use of, over here in the question options, there's display logic and skip logic. We'll go ahead and choose display logic. We'll say this question or display logic is based on embedded data. Approver is greater than or equal to 1. This way, even when we get to that second step, this value still shows, and the next step, the next step in the approver chain can see that it was approved. So we'll go ahead and click save, and then we'll do the same thing for this one. We haven't set up this workflow yet to change it to 2, but I'm just going to go ahead and do it at this point. We'll do display logic, embedded data, go to approver, is greater than or equal to 2. We don't want approver 1 to see this approver 2 email. You may, but it could just be unnecessary data for them to see. So now I'm going to go ahead and publish this. And we're going to do a test here to make sure I'm on the right track. And while I go ahead and run this test, please feel free to ask any questions that you may have. So I'm going to go into distributions and get my live link. Copy this, paste it. Now, it may skip the authenticator because I'm already logged in, but know that it did go through that process. But I already have an active token, and I don't want to show you all my login credentials, so I'm just going to go ahead and do that. Here I have an example of a preamble. You could insert a consent form on this page, and if they click yes, they go through. But if you wanted to, you could set up something in your survey flow back here to say, if question 1, if this preamble is selected as no, you just end the survey. So the way you would do that is you could come in here and add a branch and add a condition. These branches are similar to the workflow conditions we saw earlier. I'd say insert preamble, question is no, and then just add a end of survey block. So this says if they get to this preamble question, it branches, it checks if they clicked yes or no. If they click no, it just ends the survey. That way you don't waste their time. They're not willing to agree to the terms and conditions. So we'll just go ahead and click apply. So I'll click yes. Here I have a question of, is this value of this procurement greater than 500? Those of you who worked with P cards, you could see that there could be value with this. In this case, if you click yes, it gives you this P-card special exception form file upload. And that's using the same skip logic we were doing before. If you were to click no, it wouldn't show you this, and they wouldn't need to do that sort of upload. Now, I'm seeing a full response of my questions, right? So it's a little confusing because I clicked next and it took me to this end page. That's because I have it to show me a full breakdown of my responses when I get to the end. So now that should go ahead and trigger the workflow. So let me come back to my workflow. Yep. So here's that initial email we saw where it sent me, hello, Ryan, thank you for taking our survey. You expect your approval within this time. And then it went ahead and gave me my response summary. And then here's my approver link. Sorry, yes. So here's my approver link. This would go to your approver. They would, see all the answers, and then they would need to come in here and approve or deny a request. In this case, they could come here and click this. It'll bring them back into that person's questions. You can see those answers are already saved. So they can see that they agreed. You would be able to see their choice here. You'd be able to see their uploaded file. And now we have this new question. Approver 1, do you approve? Approver 1, do you disapprove? And then we can go ahead and click approve or disapprove. And you could set up some flow to say, all right, well, if you disapprove, it shows you this, reason for rejecting this request. You would fill this out, and then you could set up a workflow to send this reason to your customer and say, well, this request was rejected for X reason. Please resubmit with this information. Or, we had to deny it for technical reasons. Please resubmit. We'll say this did not have the 5 W's. Very, very common reason for rejection at UNM is it does not have a business purpose. So we'll just say that, and then we could set it up to go back. But now, if we wanted to set up a second set, I don't know when we're going to get kicked out of this meeting, everybody. We are at time soon, within 10 minutes. So if we do get kicked out at the 11-minute mark or at 11 a.m., please submit any questions you have to qualtrics@unm.edu. And thank you, of course, for joining and taking time to view this. We would be happy to prescribe custom solutions. We can't develop them for you, but we can work with you to build out these workflows. But as long as we're in this meeting, I'd like to continue on and continue to show off what we have and what we can do in this tool. So I'm going to go ahead and create a second workflow here. Actually, I can just go ahead and make a copy of this one and then alter it from there. That way I don't have to go too crazy. So I'll click on this. I'm going to rename it, call it Approver 2. I'm going to delete this step that sends the responses to the customer because I don't want it to do that twice. We're going to edit this condition because we don't want this to happen on our new response. We only want this to happen after the first approver approves. So we'll say if approver is greater than or is not empty. So, it's been populated by that sourced link we did before. It will trigger this, and we don't want this to fire off more than once. So that's why we're doing that here. We're going to edit this one to adjust. Oops. I made a mistake. Sorry, one moment. I'll come in here. I'm going to get the details from this one. And while I do this, I'm just going to make a quick recommendation to all my project managers out there. If you are building something like this, my best suggestion is to map it out beforehand, perhaps using a flowchart or some sort of thought map, because troubleshooting and setting these up on the fly can be quite difficult, especially if you have a complex approval process with a bunch of end conditions and start conditions. So drawing it out will be really amazing for troubleshooting these issues. So as you saw, I just copied this link here. That way I can reuse it and adjust it. So I'm copying this link from my original one, and I'm going to go add it to my second one. Save. Close this. Come to Approver 2. Edit this. And I know we're using that other email that was used to inform the customer of their responses. So all of these fields don't necessarily match, but that's okay. As long as it sends to me and we adjust this value here. So this is the link that our second approver gets, right? So approver 1 approves, and then if there needs to be an escalated approval after that, you could set up as many of these in an order as you'd like. And we're just going to go ahead and change this 1 that was at the end to a 2. Say, this is step 2. When they click on this link, it'll change that approver value to 2, and we can continue to move on from there. So if I were to take it again, what it would do is, I would go through that same process I did before where I got the 2 emails. I would click on it as approver. I could go in and approve, and then assuming it was approved and that value was increased, of course, you'd want to add a little bit more complex logic to make sure, yes, in fact, it was approved, because you'd have an alternative set of logic telling folks that it was rejected. But in this case, approved by approver 1 goes to approver 2. They get that email, they click the link, they're able to see that second approval question based on the skip logic we set up and approve. And you could set up a final step that I don't think we'll have time to show off, but to send the approval email to your customer, right? We could set up step 3. If approval is 2 is approved, you could send it off. I know I'm saying approver a lot, but I think you all may get the gist, because I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. So that's the basics of setting up such a workflow as this. There are a couple things to keep in mind when doing so, which is these really do benefit from internal testing. You don't want to send this out without testing it with your internal colleagues and so on and so forth, because it could have unexpected results. And some of those unexpected results that can manifest are over here in the survey options. These survey options are how the survey behaves under general conditions. So we have a lot of options here. If you're curious about what any of these do, again, email my team. We do have presentations that we can give to your department and team on these basic features, but there's 2 in particular I want to talk about with regards to workflows. That is, do you want your respondents to be able to come back and finish later? In this case, I would say no. You probably want them to complete the full thing unless you have an accessibility reason. But if that's the case, we can talk about how you can accommodate that using alternate settings. But you want to have it as off. That way you're not dealing with incomplete data sets. You don't have too much incomplete data to worry about, and it doesn't trigger your workflows in unexpected ways. And then the other option is incomplete survey responses. Oftentimes people like to record incomplete responses. That's great. But for workflows, you definitely want to delete them, because if you set it to record, it will it'll submit incomplete responses to your data and trigger your workflows on incomplete data sets, which can be really confusing and really messy and break your workflows and and confuse your customers. So I would just say go ahead and delete them after however much time you need. Generally 1 hour is perfectly acceptable. Okay. Next, we're going to go over to data and analysis. This is, of course, where our data is aggregated and where we can export and import our data from. All these metadata fields that we've been defining, those file uploads that were shown off, all this data can be pulled from here. So if you're familiar with Smartsheets, you have an intake form on Smartsheets, everything is aggregated sort of into this Excel spreadsheet for your use. This isn't as nifty as Smartsheets for that particular case. Smartsheets is definitely a more premier project management tool, but this is free for UNM users compared to Smartsheets, which requires a paid license. And you can customize which fields you see here. So if we wanted to see approver status, we could go to embedded data and set approver. And then that would allow us to see, where's the approver at. So this one's currently at step 1 because I never clicked that step 2 link. But if approver 2 had come in, this would be at 2. And assigning your own values is perfectly doable here. I just use numbers because this is all back end. And for my purposes, I can see, okay, this as the number goes up, the escalation goes up as well. But let's say this person, they made a mistake on their submission and it's a really long form and they didn't want to come in here and take it again. You could click this hamburger menu on the right and you could do one of 2 things. You could click retake as new response and that'll just give you the anonymous link, or you can click retake response, which will give you this link here. So this is a long link compared to the normal default link, but what this is this is actually just the survey link with that question mark, QR, and then that survey respondents, and then this DEL equals 1 means show the responses. So this is that piped or that sourced link that we built in the email with the respondent ID just here. And you can copy it and you could send it to someone. And this allows them to come in and retake their survey without having to re-enter all the responses. So if they had a big block of text that they had entered, they could come in and adjust it. And you could do it this way without having to alter your approval steps. So it looks like we have a 2-minute warning here from Greg Trujillo. Thank you all so much for joining this session. Qualtrics, UNM's Qualtrics license is sponsored by the Office of the Vice President for Research. It is a enterprise-wide solution. It is usable by all members of UNM. You can use it for research, but you can also use it for a variety of things, such as scoring, quizzing, workflows like this, and to replace tools that you may be paying for. You may be paying for SurveyMonkey on your team, or you may be paying for Google Forms on your team. And it's a really good tool for soft money initiatives, grants and contracts who have to sort of balance their funds and don't have a lot of money to spend on licenses. You can go ahead, use this for your purposes of internal intake. When I worked at Project Echo, for instance, we set up a lot of Smartsheet similar forms for P-card intake and event registration. And I thank you all for coming. I hope this was a good presentation. I didn't get any questions, but I hope you all have a great rest of your day.